Imagine a massive South Dakota mountain, hundreds of workers dangling from cables, and dynamite blasting away nearly 90% of the entire rock face. That's how Mount Rushmore actually came to life between 1927 and 1941.
So I used AI to bring those forgotten years back in full, breathing color.
So you can finally see the dust, the tools, and the human scale behind this giant the way the workers themselves saw it. Trust me, once you watch what's coming next, you'll never look at this monument the same way again. Before the first drill ever hit granite, South Dakota had a problem and a dream. State leaders wanted a huge attraction that would pull visitors from across the country, and state historian Doane Robinson came up with the idea of carving a mountain. He brought in sculptor Gutzon Borglum, a man already known for thinking on a massive scale, and the two of them began pushing the project forward together. The legal work mattered just as much as the artistic vision. In South Dakota, a memorial bill was actually defeated twice before it narrowly passed, and the governor finally signed it on March 5, 1925. That signature created the first real legal permission for the project to move forward. Then, in the summer of 1927, Borglum invited President Calvin Coolidge to visit the site for a dedication ceremony. Coolidge attended on August 10, 1927, and promised federal support for the project. Borglum even dropped a wreath from a small airplane as part of the invitation, which tells you exactly how hard he was willing to push for national attention. He chose 4 presidents to represent the nation's foundation, expansion, development, and preservation, calling the work a shrine of democracy. The actual carving began on October 4, 1927, and this was the moment when Mount Rushmore stopped being a debate and became a real job site. Workers installed heavy machinery on top of the mountain, set up cable systems, and started preparing the first head, which would be George Washington. The early work looked more like industrial mining than sculpture, because before anyone could shape a face, crews had to remove huge amounts of weathered surface rock to reach the solid granite underneath. What made the whole thing possible was careful measurement. Borglum used a detailed scale model and a pointing system that transferred positions from plaster to stone at a ratio where 1 inch on the model equaled 1 foot on the actual mountain. In simple terms, the mountain was treated like a giant workshop wall, and every single feature had precise coordinates before it ever had shape. In 1928, the work settled into a daily rhythm, and that rhythm explains the speed that came later. Workers climbed 700 stairs to the top of the mountain, punched a time clock, and then were lowered over a roughly 500-foot cliff face in bosun chairs. Callboys sat near the edge of the mountain and shouted messages back and forth so that drillers could be raised or lowered safely, because a winch turned too fast could literally drag a man upward face first against the rock. The carving technique was now fully established. Powdermen used dynamite to remove precise amounts of rock, blasting carefully until only a few inches remained before the final surface. Then the work shifted to honeycombing, which meant drilling holes very close together so that weakened granite could be knocked away by hand. Finally, workers smoothed everything with bumping tools that polished the surface until it looked bright and clean from a distance. This was also a year of brutal weather, with workers facing everything from blazing summer heat to bitter cold and high winds. In 1929, the project became formally national. Park records list February 25, 1929, as the official establishment date for Mount Rushmore National Memorial. The Great Depression also began that same year, but somehow the memorial survived, partly because it became a jobs program as well as a symbolic project. The mood at the site felt like stubborn determination. Money was getting tighter all across America, but on the mountain itself, the work simply continued because stopping would have meant losing both momentum and funding. Then, in 1930, the first major public milestone arrived. George Washington's head was officially dedicated that year, which showed that Borglum and his backers understood something important about funding and public attention. When you can show real, visible progress, you can keep the whole funding machine moving forward. The dedication was part celebration and part strategy, because the carving was still evolving and many years of additional work remained ahead. In 1931, The focus was mostly on refining Washington's details and on removing rock as efficiently as possible. After dynamite brought the general shape close to where it needed to be, drillers honeycombed the surface, and then assistants removed the weakened stone, often by hand. It was much slower than blasting, but it was the only way a rough head could become a recognizable human expression. Then, in 1932, the project continued under the dark shadow of the Depression. National Park Service records preserve workers describing their jobs in plain words, saying things like, "I run a jackhammer," or "I earn $8 a day." Those simple lines really do capture the mood of the era. When the country is struggling that badly, a hard and dangerous job can still feel like a lucky one. This year also showed exactly why the project could keep moving without constant tragedy. Crews had carefully developed routines, callboys coordinated every message, and blasting always required clearing workers off the face beforehand. Across the entire 14-year construction project, not a single fatality ever occurred. In 1933, the management of the project changed in a way that affected daily life on the mountain. Executive Order 6166 was issued on June 10, 1933, placing Mount Rushmore under the official authority of the National Park Service, with engineer Julian Spotts overseeing many practical improvements to the site. Senator Peter Norbeck also worked hard behind the scenes to secure continued funding through emergency relief programs connected to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. For the crew, this year was about infrastructure as much as carving, with better transport systems and better organization, saving precious hours. Then, in 1934, Washington reached his major completion milestone. By July 4, 1934, his face had been fully completed and dedicated, which is exactly why Washington became the anchor point for the entire group of four faces. The project could now treat his finished head as a reference point for everything that came next. Standing there on a clear morning in 1934, you would probably feel relief more than triumph. One head being officially done finally proved that the whole memorial could actually be completed. In 1935, attention turned fully toward Thomas Jefferson, and that moment is exactly where the project showed its flexibility. Borglum had originally planned to place Jefferson on Washington's right side, but the rock there turned out to be too cracked and unstable, so the partial carving was blasted away entirely, and Jefferson was moved to Washington's left side instead. That kind of restart was incredibly costly, but it was also the difference between forcing a bad surface and building something that could actually last for centuries. This year also revealed how repetitive the carving method had become. And finally, bumping tools smoothed the surface until it gleamed in the sun. Then, in 1936, Jefferson reached his own public milestone with an official dedication. Two faces were now strong enough to be presented as finished work to the public. In 1937, Abraham Lincoln's face became the next focus, and it was officially dedicated on September 17, 1937. That same year, Congress rejected several proposals for adding more figures to the mountain and pushed the project to focus entirely on finishing what had already been started. That decision permanently locked the memorial into the four faces we all know today. Then, in 1938, the project's politics flared up again in interesting ways. Borglum managed to return control of the project to an appointed commission made up mostly of his own choices. With that new freedom, he began work on a hall hidden behind the sculpture, meant to preserve the entire story of the United States in stone. This year really showed Borglum's ambitious personality as much as the mountain itself did. He wanted the four faces, of course, but he also desperately wanted words, documents, and a much fuller national story preserved up there forever. In 1939, Theodore Roosevelt's face was officially dedicated, finally completing the full set of four presidential heads on the mountain. That same year, a sculptor's studio was built at the site to preserve Borglum's models and tools, and to help visitors understand the carving process. But that year was also when Congress threatened to cut off all funding unless the remaining money was used strictly to finish the sculpture itself, which forced Borglum to stop work on his beloved Hall of Records project. When I think about 1939, I picture the project narrowing its focus dramatically. 4 faces had to be completed, not 4 full bodies, and not an entire carved history wall hidden behind them. The mountain's final look was being locked in, partly by artistic choices and partly by tight budgets. In 1940, the work was all about finishing and refining, not starting any new faces. Surfaces were smoothed carefully, edges were sharpened, and details like the eyes were shaped so they would actually sparkle and seem alive when viewed from a distance. The memorial was already famous across America, but the workers still showed up to that mountain every single day to make cold stone feel like living human expression. This year also had a quiet tension humming behind it because Europe was already at war and the United States was watching events intensify with growing concern. The end of the carving work was now being linked partly to America's likely involvement in World War II, which meant the project was finishing under a global shadow that grew darker every month. In 1941, the story turned sharply and unexpectedly. Gutzon Borglum died in Chicago on March 6, 1941. His son Lincoln Borglum took over the project and put the finishing touches on his father's vision over the following months. But the larger plans, including carving the 4 figures from head to waist, were officially abandoned. On October 31, 1941, the memorial was formally declared a completed project. This ending was both practical and deeply emotional. The project had lost its driving force, war pressures were rising rapidly, and both funding and national attention were shifting elsewhere. When you look at the final photographs from that time, the 4 faces appear timeless and eternal. But the actual stopping point was very human, shaped by death, politics, and a world that was changing fast around the mountain. And that's the amazing history behind Mount Rushmore. 14 years, 450,000 tons of rock, hundreds of brave workers, and not a single life lost on that mountain. Pretty incredible when you really stop and think about it. Now I'm curious, which face hit you the hardest watching this in color?
Drop it in the comments because I genuinely read every single one. And if this pulled you in, hit that like button and subscribe.
Because I've got more forgotten history coming back to life with AI very soon. You won't want to miss what I'm working on next. See you there.